like to call this February 13th meeting of the Finance and Budget Committee to order and take roll.
Councilmember Kelly. Here. Committee Member McMillan.
Here.
Councilmember Nguyen. Councilmember Nusma.
Here.
Committee Member Rikus.
Here.
Chair Livingston.
Here. So we have a quorum. All right, very good. We will go on to public comment. First with anyone in the room.
I'll grab the post position. My name is Jack Mortel, lifelong resident, retired fire captain, president of the Evanston Firefighters Pension Fund. I've got two issues I'd like to kick around tonight, and I'll be brief. I see you got a full docket. The two issues are, the first one is the collection and allocation of the 2023 PPRT funds that came in 2023. Now, luckily, we signed a historic agreement back in July, and it gave direction on where the PPRT should go. And I'm just going to quote off of this. This was agreed to, this was voted on 8-0 by the council. There was no dissent. Everyone was glad to do this. And it is the goal of this policy to achieve full funding by 2040, and that on an annual basis, 100% or more. 100% isn't a cap, that's a starting point. Of the ADC is contributed to the public safety pension plans. Then that's on page 3. I'll give you the copy. I made extra. This next one is then on page 4. They talk about sources of pension contributions. And number 2 is the maximum allowable PPRT. And I've got a companion document that I'll also hand you. Was it, per the budget, there was $2,805,000 in the budget where the PPRT was supposed to go. At the end of the day, we collected over $4 million. Basically, an additional 1.3 million PPRT came in after this was signed. This came in after July.
As part of 2023 budget.
It's part of the 23 budget. I believe that should go to the public safety pension funds. That's the first thing I'm talking about. And then the next thing I'd like to talk about is the levy on the loss factor. I could go into great detail, but basically, I looked at, there was a nice document in the packet for tonight. It was a bit lacking. It really should have, in addition to the, it has the fiscal year, the gross levy, the actual, and the percentage. To give a true picture, you should have the net levy and that percentage. And if you did that, you would see that we consistently, out of all these figures, there's only one where it's dead on. Let's see. Pages of figures, there's only one time when we were level with that net levy. All the other times, more money came in than the net levy, okay? I can show you, it's pretty, if they put that column and put the net levy in and the percentage of net levy, you would see that they collect more than the net levy. But I'm here tonight for the public safety pensions. When you collect more, and I know that they do, than the net levy, does that extra money go to the pensions or does it go to the general fund? I can't answer that. It's hard for me to track. That's what I'd like to get an accounting from finance chairman, or excuse me, the budget and finance chief. And that's, and again, I'm the president. We're going through an audit right now, a 10-year audit. I have a meeting this February, and I want to be able to report to my board how much money's been levied the last 5 years, how much has been collected under the face of pensions, and how much of that money actually went to the pensions. I think it's a legitimate question, and I should be able to have the answer to that. That's all I've got for now. And I'd like to reserve a chance when you talk about the levy, I can go into greater detail on that. When you're discussing it, I could be called upon to add to the conversation.
You know, I don't think that's appropriate for tonight because we have a full agenda. We want to just go through his data. But I think the point that you're bringing up about the interpretation of the policy, it would be my view we owe the pensions the actuarially determined calculation. And that comes from a variety of sources, which because of the nature of using estimates and actual, each can individually vary, but ultimately what is due is the actuarially determined calculation from a variety of sources. But why don't we have that be a discussion for a future meeting, because I think it's a very valid point.
That's what I was hoping to open the door on that. We could sit down and kick it
I think that's
around.
fine, but if between the two funds, they're due 28 million, I think they're due 28 million from a variety of sources, which will always vary to some degree, but what is owed to the pension funds is that actuarially, we stumble over that word, actuarially
It's a tough.
determined calculation.
Right.
And the individual, the general fund is sort of the swing for all that, and some years it might be positive, some might be negative, but what is due is the gross.
Okay, yeah.
But I think it's a good point, and we should discuss it more, and maybe even get legal input about, all these pieces vary. Does that change the contribution or just change the source of the contribution?
So, I'm sorry, but it is 100%, it does say our resolution is basis of 100% or more, and with regard to funding sources, and thank you, Mr. Martell, for coming out, I do think it is appropriate when we discuss the allowable loss factor, since this is what he's referring to, and we do liaison with the pension, I think it's very appropriate for him to weigh in if he has more details. It also says the maximum allowable PPRT allocation. That's one of the sources. So if we ended up with, and I really appreciate him coming here to let us know that we ended up with $1.3 million over what we budgeted. And this should be discussed. If we have here the maximum allowable amount is in our resolution, and it says the basis of 100% or more of the ADC. So that needs to, that's our resolution, so. And the more we pay down, the better for taxpayers, and,
So,
So-
I know you
I
got
think
a
we
lot to
should move
tackle
on.
tonight.
Right.
Yeah.
I think we have our first item for the next meeting.
Yeah.
I would argue,
And I would
because it's
just
complex.
Yeah, and I'd say,
Okay.
look, if we can agree to disagree on this right now, because, I strongly feel that money should go toward the pensions. So I'm agreeing to disagree, and we'll discuss this in a further,
All right, Jack,
meeting.
thank you. See your point, but we have to, determine what's the best approach. All right, so next public comment. Thank you, Jack. Tim.
Good evening, Timothy Schoolmaster, Evanston Police Pension Fund. I have mostly good news for you tonight. You may have seen in the papers that we struck out in the Supreme Court with our attempt to find the consolidation of the pension funds unconstitutional. It is what it is. As fiduciaries, we had an obligation to bring this. And my members have asked, and members of the public have asked, how will this affect things? Well, our operations, it's not going to affect at all. It's a headache that I'm kind of happy to shed, because all that we're transferring is the money. And they will never have 100% of our money, because we'll be keeping at least $4 million in our operating account, as the statute provides. And we are trying to think through the process. Based on what we've heard from them, we're probably going to have control of our money till at least October. That's not our call, that's somebody else's call. And the liquidation costs was a huge objection to this. If I have $100 million worth of bonds to pay pension benefits and I liquidate them early, I might get, 80 cents on the dollar if I'm lucky. And then I give the 80 million to the investment fund, and what happens to that 20 million? Do I have to come back to the taxpayers and say I need an additional 20 million because this thing? So if we hang on to those and kind of spread them out as they mature, we may minimize the effect on that. And I understand some other funds have done that without any repercussions. We plan to keep our own actuary because the investment fund, of course, is still wedded to projection unit credit and 90% funding, both of which you have wisely rejected. And interestingly, the 2023, the Police Officers Investment Fund's net return on investment was 13.7%. And the Evanston Police Pension Fund was 17.2%, 3.5% higher. And also, and this occurred some time ago, and we won't know the amount of money we're going to get, but in our continuing efforts to minimize the burden on the Evanston taxpayer, In the Northern District of California, there was a case that we filed, a securities fraud case against the McKesson Corporation, the largest distributor of pharmaceutical products in the United States. It was a price-fixing conspiracy among generic drug makers and McKesson. And so they have agreed to a $141 million settlement among the shareholders who filed claims. We don't know what ours will be. We don't know how many people filed the claims. We do know the lawyers will be getting $24 million out of that. So, but that's how they make their living. So that's what I have tonight. Thank you.
Are the bonds short bonds or they're long bonds that you have?
Well, we have some corporate, we have some government, we have, and one of our fixed income managers, Garcia Hamilton in Houston, just happens to be a manager for the investment fund. So that,
They just merged the funds?
well, we're hoping they will, but I don't want to lose any money in this transition. And when COGFA studied this whole thing in 2012 and 2013, and the numbers were much higher, they estimated then that the liquidation recovery time would be 10 or more years. And who pays for that, of course? The taxpayers.
Not exactly, because I know people like that.
Okay, no, we're going to make sure there'll be a very minimal loss if we can, anything we can do to do that.
20% seems high.
But I think that's another thing we could do for the next meeting of, since the inception of these state pools, let's just compare for police and fire pre-consolidation, because fire is consolidated, and I think it's gone well with that. But regardless, what have we earned in our funds? And then what was the state pool? And let's just try to understand that year by year. But regardless, it is now, I think, fully established state law that we need to minimize any loss on this transfer. I would assume that the bonds that are in there that have lost value because of the increase in rates are already being marked to market in our valuation. So it's not like it's an incremental loss, it's the loss, the market value is already established in the current funding level.
Well, we'll see it. They do a valuation before the transfer actually takes place. And how much do you have? And then I want to see how much they actually get.
Okay.
And I want to minimize any losses to the taxpayers and our members.
Absolutely. So I think that this is another point too, of how do we envision this? Maybe it's too early to do the transfer discussion, but at any rate, we have another item we need to fully understand too, because no one's looking to leave money on the table
No.
as this transfer gets executed.
We'll
How did your transfer go? Did you guys lose a lot when you transferred?
That's, if you ask them about that, that's not a figure they wish to disclose. And it's apparently at their end that we may not be transferring till October. I mean, it could be next week if they wanted, but we'll see.
All right.
Thank
So
you.
thank you, Tim. Anybody else in the room for public comment? All right. Online for public comment, Mike?
Brian, I see your hand up first.
Yes, thank you. I'm Brian Bacharis, and I'm a lifetime resident. And you've heard this before. I'm a multi-parcel taxpayer, and I'm very disturbed that this committee was not consulted and did not review the expensive 15-year lease proposal to temporarily house the city's business operations, especially as it came to light that a 3 to 5 year lease is available at similar-sized office space in Evanston. And also, similarly, why wasn't this committee consulted about the purchase of Little Beans Cafe? Both of these items are not in the 2024 budget, and they are just going to be additional tax burdens for people for years and years to come. This is going to change the fabric of our community forever. And when you consider that we need another similarly sized police and fire headquarters, we're looking at $200+ million in more debt. I'm hoping that there's some kind of mechanism that this committee can, or protest that this committee can deliver to our mayor and other council members. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Other online comment?
Yeah, Tricia?
Tricia Connolly, Second Ward. I would just echo what Brian shared. And I know we have a lot of council members on this committee on this call right now, or several. I would just really, push you all to really think about your actions and if they're transparent or if they're opaque. And I'm not really trying to come down hard on you, yourselves as individuals, but I'd like you to step back and take a look at this from the eyes of a community member or community members and really ask yourself, what does it look like when, we've been told we need a new civic center, when we've been told we need a new police and fire building, and then there's money being spent to buy another building that, as far as I can tell, isn't of urgent need. And it's very, very troubling. And when we make a claim that we want to help people in our community and provide services and have some financial ability to do that, if we're really that community, we better really get it together and start prioritizing seriously what we're spending money on and prioritizing what really needs to be done urgently versus planning for the future otherwise. This Civic Center thing, I don't know what's driving it. I understand the facility that people are working in isn't perfect. I understand there's work that needs to be done. But is that higher priority than the police and fire? I don't know. I'm not the expert. We're dependent on staff to tell us. But this idea we're going to get all of this done together is out of the box. And, it's just not really respectful to the community, and especially for the community members that are going to be stressed on having to deal with that money that's got to come forward. And I'm really asking the Finance and Budget Committee to start integrating into these conversations and making recommendations about what we do, how we do it, and prioritizing. Because I'm sorry, from City Council, it's not looking that way. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Meg Welsh.
Yes, Meg Welch, Fourth Ward, and I just want to read a direct quote from Mayor Biss, as quoted by the September 15th, 2023 roundtable at City Council. And he says, quote, "I think we're going to have to be very, very restrained as we look at, for instance, expansion of employee headcount and taking out of other obligations, especially long-term obligations." So I just wonder what has changed in the past 4 months. There's a couple of long-term obligations that we've taken out. And since they are long-term obligations, and my understanding of the purview of this committee is to consider the advisability of long-term obligations, why, for example, the police on 909 Davis was not brought before this committee for consideration. So I'm confused. What is this committee for? I'm also really puzzled why those of you who had a chance to vote for negotiation of a shorter lease and maybe look at an alternative location and consider it, which would have definitely saved the city money in the long term, refused to do it last night. And Alderman Newsma, I did follow up. I sent you an email. I really am curious in what your logic is on that. But, as previous speakers have said, some of us are getting very worried about whether Evanston is starting to appear to, as a full trough, and y'all come.
Thank you. Additional public comment? Okay.
Just noting real quick that council members Reed and Burns are on the call
We're on the
virtually.
call now.
Yep.
Okay, got it. This came up in a couple of points. Isn't there, can't the lease be terminated at 7 years? I thought I read that somewhere.
With a penalty, I think a $9 million penalty.
Is it a $9 million penalty on that?
Does it take 7 years to build a new building?
There is a 7-year termination clause, is my understanding.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
Got it.
We have a long agenda. I'd really like to stick to
Let's
this
do.
agenda.
I got it. Okay, very good. Okay, so let's get in with the ending public comment. Let's get into the next section. So the approval of the committee meeting minutes from the last meeting. Hopefully, everybody had a chance to review them. Is there a motion to
So
accept the
moved.
minutes? Second. Everybody, okay. Any objection to the, do we have to do a roll call, or can we just pass them by voice vote? Any objection to the minutes?
We have to do a roll call since there are committee members.
Got it.
involved.
Okay. Let's do a roll call.
I just want to be clear, we do not have to do a roll call.
Okay.
It is an option to, we don't have to.
Okay, let's do a roll call. All right.
Councilmember Kelly? Aye. Committee Member McMillan?
Aye.
Councilmember Nusma? Aye. Committee Member Rikus?
Aye.
Councilmember Burns?
Aye.
Councilmember Reed?
Aye.
And I'm an aye.
Chair Livingston?
Very good. Okay, so there, it was just mentioned a minute ago, there are several items that I think should go really quickly. We want to leave as much time as possible to discuss the Civic Center and Police and Fire Headquarters item, which is last. So hopefully we can stay on task and get through several of these items as expeditiously as possible. So first item is to review the peer communities. I might say
I'll
on the
move.
peer communities, we can add additional communities later. This is just to get going on our project and what it's going to look like. It's certainly not the final list, but happy to go through the good work that you've done so far. So it's very
So moved.
thorough. Yeah. All right.
Good evening.
I'm sorry, there,
Is there a second?
point of order, just a motion, so I'll move this item.
Second.
Okay. All right. So we're on FB1, review and approval of the staff recommended peer communities.
Great. Good evening, committee members. Michael Van Dorp, financial analyst. I will walk through kind of this initial work that was put into determining peer communities for Evanston. So we'll talk a little bit about the feedback that you all gave us in January. We'll talk some about the data sources that I pulled to do this analysis, the short list that I created, the criteria for that, the parameters that were evaluated to determine what communities are comparable to Evanston, and then ultimately our recommendation of 7 communities at this time to be considered our peer communities. So as a reminder, establishing a list of peer communities was a priority for 2024 set by this committee. That's kind of what set us on this track. And at last month's meeting, you all identified that population, geographic location and county, a presence of a 4-year university, the makeup of residents, and then units of government units within a government were important criteria to consider when making a peer community list. We also put forth that we thought 7 to 10 was a target number to start with, and you all generally agreed 7 to 10 communities was an appropriate number to start. The data sources that I used to pull this was the U.S. Census, straight from the federal government, as well as the community's annual comprehensive financial reports or their annual audits, budget documents for these communities, and in a few cases, community websites where some information wasn't available in those financial records. We created a short list of 40 communities that met one of 3 criteria. Most of the communities met the 50-50 criteria, which we were considering they were within 50% of Evanston's population, and they were within 50 miles of Evanston. In the meeting in January, we had suggested a slightly shorter geographic region. You all asked to expand it, and coincidentally, 50 miles is also about the distance from Evanston to the southern border of Cook County. So that kind of lined up well with some other recommendations that folks had. So 3/4 of the communities in this shortlist met that criteria. Additionally, we added a few more that had four-year universities with at least 10,000 students. We did not consider communities with public two-year schools or community colleges because they are their own taxing bodies, or they have their own means of taxing bodies, so we wanted to keep that separate, and so we just looked at four-year universities with at least 10,000 students, which got us our Champaign, Urbana, Bloomington, Normal, also Carbondale and Edwardsville, as, again, just to take a look at what those communities were doing. And then additionally, we added communities that you all mentioned by name in January. So there was overlap with that, but a few that were added would have been Peoria, Naperville, and Wilmette that didn't meet criteria 1 or criteria 2. We also decided that we were not going to consider Chicago a peer community for the purpose of this analysis, that they're just significantly larger than all of us. And yes, Illinois municipalities as well. Thank you for clarifying. Yes. Yep. So once we had these 40 communities, we evaluated them on 17 parameters. This is included in the memo and that was a part of the agenda for today's meeting. And essentially, it's a binary for each of these parameters, 1 point each. Did a community have it, or did they not have this, meeting a certain parameter? And I, again, included the rubric that we use to help define who got 0, or in some cases, half points, 0, half, or 1 point for the various parameters.
There's information
yes.
On that, Chair, or if you prefer I wait to the end, let me know your preference, but.
Yeah, go ahead. That's
okay. Yeah, I have a few concerns. I wasn't present for last month's meeting, but can I get some clarity on why, for example, foundation or the year that the city was founded is important?
So the reason we chose the foundation
and weighted so
year
heavily, essentially.
Yeah, the foundation year, we were trying to essentially come up with a parameter to identify how old the city was. So communities that are younger, have been established and incorporated within, say, the last 50 years, we felt may have substantially different old assets, et cetera, things along those lines that would be different from communities that are as old as Evanston or older. Yeah.
Okay.
That was the idea behind that. Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the last thing.
Yeah, that was the purpose behind that foundation year, was just trying to acknowledge old versus newer cities or municipalities.
I appreciate that. And then also there's a criteria around a city's white population.
Mm-hmm.
Why was that chosen?
So that was one of the stats that we pulled from the U.S. Census Bureau, and we felt it was important to include some parameter around the racial demographics of Evanston. It is an imperfect parameter.
Sorry if I may interrupt there.
Yeah.
My concern is that if we're going to be concerned about the racial demographics, I don't know if the white population is the population that I would focus on. In my book, I think focusing on more populations that tend to have more difficulties, such as the Black community, the Hispanic community, I think would be more comparable, because there are cities that may have large minority populations, but it could be primarily, Asian or Indian immigrants, which we know statistically speaking, certain Asian populations and Indian populations are doing quite economically well, and so I wouldn't want to compare what's going on there to Evanston. So to me, rather than focusing on the white population, I think focusing on the Black or Black and brown population would be more telling.
Yep. Yeah, Councilmember Reed, I agree with you. It is an extraordinarily nuanced and complicated thing, and we were trying to keep this simple. And I realize that in doing that, we are I'm contributing to some of those problems by choosing to focus on white, non-Hispanic members of our community as opposed to marginalized members of our community. And in the purpose of this evaluation, to try and keep things simple, that was a single stat that was listed on the U.S. Census Bureau that we felt was a loose approximation to try and narrow down the number of people of color and or those that are Hispanic within our community versus not, and to award communities that are similarly made up around that awarded them in terms of this analysis for getting a point or not. But I agree that this is extraordinarily nuanced and complicated, and I think a future analysis looking more at the racial demographics and ethnic demographics of our community may be warranted.
And can I ask,
Okay.
what was your criteria? I mean, was it that white is not above a certain percent? I mean, is it?
So we looked at a percentage compared to Evanston. So Evanston was,
range.
Evanston was 58.4% white non-Hispanic. And so communities that were within, like essentially 15% of that is who we said were most racially and ethnically similar to Evanston. But
So you are trying to get to ethnic diversity.
A little
It's just
bit.
you're picking the,
It's an
the
imperfect
white
measure.
single measure
Correct.
to try to get to that.
Correct. It is an imperfect measure trying to get to that binary. Yes.
And I think it was on the right track. I think we could just get a bit better and a bit closer if instead of choosing white, we chose communities that we know historically have had higher, have been historically disenfranchised more than others. Last question here is, there's another criteria that, I'm sorry. There's another criteria, about whether the committee, whether the council is, or board or whatever is elected by ward or at large or some combination thereof. Why does that matter?
So we were looking at a couple of different things. There were a few other parameters that we even dropped that I could share a little bit about later. But we looked at that as a means of, again, what the composition of the board, that council members here who are representing wards are seeking to be elected by a smaller population of the community, as opposed to communities that are strictly at large, where they have to appeal to the entire population of a community. So we felt that change, or that difference in structure, was enough to warrant a point, or another, thing among the 17 that we looked at as a way to, again, differentiate what communities are similar to Evanston and which ones are not similar to Evanston.
Was there any consideration given to looking at cities that are particularly well-run? I mean, love to see us be, more aspirational, like Naperville is, known to be a very well-run city. As an example, I don't think Oak Park particularly is. So I think we should set our benchmarks high so we have something to aim for. And maybe that's harder to codify, but I think it's
that would be
something
my
we should
question
consider.
is, what is your recommendation for how we could attempt to quantify that? And I think I hear you, and how would we attempt to quantify that?
Councilmember Kelly?
Yeah, so I mean, I do think
I'm
that
sorry.
some.
If I could just wrap up here. My apologies. I just have one last point to make.
Sure.
Do we have a breakdown of, what the points were assigned? Maybe I missed it, but I
It's
certainly
on
read
Appendix
the
B,
criteria.
Devon.
It's in the
I'm
packet.
sorry?
Yeah. Appendix B.
Okay, it's in the packet.
In
Of
the
how many
packet.
points were assigned to each community?
So a possible total of 17. The highest only reached
Okay.
11 and a half, which I'll talk a little
Okay.
bit more about. Yep.
And I'm curious if maybe tweaking some of this, and last thing I'll say here is that, I even mentioned earlier, maybe we could use the black population, but now in response to, what was just stated by Committee Member McMillan, I believe, I do think, looking at poverty, because we can't, Naperville, sure, you could say it's a well-run city, but what is their diversity? What is their population of low-income residents? Evanston has challenges that are actually more comparable to Chicago than Naperville or Wilmette or other communities because of our diversity. And so I really don't want us to stray too far from what Evanston really is. I know we don't want to say, we're like Chicago, but in many regards we are. And so I just really would love to see how the numbers would shake out if we took away what I see as some of the kind of superfluous metrics, especially giving a full point just because they elect council members by ward versus at large. I don't know why that would be weighted the same as, other criteria that I think are more important. And so I think, we're here now. This is not some final list. And as the chair said, we can continue to work on this. But I do think that if we benchmark ourselves to the wrong communities, we're going to get the wrong outcomes. We're going to be looking toward a North Star that leads us in the wrong direction. Thank you.
Councilmember Newsome.
Thank you,
And
Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry, Kelly, you're like, what's up? Councilmember Kelly. And
So
then I think we need to
Okay,
bring
wrap
it
up.
to a
So first,
conclusion for now.
thank you, Michael. This is great. This is really fabulous work and really makes it clear for us, and I think that's a great way to put this together. I agree with Councilmember Reed. There are a few things on here I wouldn't, foundation year, how people vote, I don't think that's necessary, but I think this is really, an excellent way to present the data. I agree with Leslie. I think we should look at, not right now, because I think it is complicated, like what does it mean to be an aspirational city? I think it involves looking at per capita expenditures, and Devon, to your point, social service, the social service net, social safety net, rather, and all that, looking at the population, how well they're served based on a budget. But I don't think that's for tonight, but I would say that that might be something we do want to look at, like what does make an aspirational? What is a city that has a really well-run city, a budget and finance department, and a budget that's something to aspire towards. So I would recommend that we do all kind of think about that and consider trying to identify maybe 3 to 5 cities nationwide. It doesn't, and how they operate. And I'm happy also to try to gather that information at the National League of Cities. So, thank you.
Councilmember Newsma, and then I think.
Yeah, thank you,
there's
Mr.
any
Chair.
other
I'd like to
comments
get
or
through
stuff.
this expeditiously. This was an attempt to kind of quantify a lot of stuff that is really more qualitative. So I appreciate this thorough analysis. The objective here is to come up with a handful of cities that we can compare ourselves to see how we're doing, benchmarking against other communities. So quite a thorough analysis. Foundation year, I think, is actually important. We just had to raise our water and sewer rates to help pay for our aging sewer infrastructure. That's something that, for example, a younger community like Naperville is not going to have to wrestle with for another 50 years or so. So there's a distinct difference there, and trying to find a community as close to us as possible is what we're trying to do here. So let's not overthink this. We've got the 7 recommendations. Let's roll with this. We can add, we can subtract. Let's not make this more difficult.
I think eventually if we end up with 10 to 12 to 15, but we can move on to the next phase of let's start thinking about what data we want to collect and how we're going to present it.
Yeah.
And sort of move on from there. But yes, there's Glenview. There's some other places we might want to say we think they're interesting to add. And we can add them later. We can add them in a few months once we sort of have started collecting the data.
Yeah, I just want to say, maybe we move ahead with these 7 communities and come up with what our criteria is that we're going to benchmark. And then after we start that, we might see, we should add this community because
They're
this is
particularly good.
imperfect data. But
Yeah.
I would love to just get going. These are some good communities. You can always refine the list, but another important part is going to be what are we looking at to benchmark? Is that something you're going to come to us with? Like full-time equivalents?
But I think it's also determining whatever we're looking at. So for example, if we're looking at allowable loss factor, like things like that, we could compare to some of these cities. I think it's sort of what we're looking at addressing in terms of our budget. I think then we can bring those in mostly. I also want to be assurance that this won't in any way slow us down, because it's great to have this, but where we wouldn't end up postponing moving forward to improve our budget and finance in the city because we're waiting for data. So I would just ask that, if we can get some of this sometimes when we're working, great, and if not, again, I just don't want to see us postponing any meetings or actions while we wait for information.
Thank you.
So this is an action item, I guess, to approve this initial list of cities? Is that
Yeah.
more of a discussion point? But I'm comfortable in voting now that we go ahead and do that so we can get onto the other items, knowing that this is not the final list. Hopefully we'll,
Continue to add.
the initial work will inform us on additional communities we want to add. So I think it's I don't have exact wording here, but it's
Just
to,
one last question. Sorry, Chair, if it's fine. Do any of these 7 communities have a black population over, let's say, 15, 16%?
I would need to go back and look at the census data. I did not pull all of that for every community, but it's possible. I
Okay,
don't
and
know.
then do any of these communities have a poverty rate or folks who are facing food insecurity or whatever the case that is, again, over about 15%, similar to Evanston. I just think that's so critical, and I'm a bit scared I'm looking at this list, and I'm just a bit concerned about who we're going to be benchmarking ourselves against, particularly with communities that don't have the same challenges as Evanston. I can support it for now. I'm sure there's something to learn from them. Still very, very concerned about this list.
Yeah, again, I did not pull that specific data. I know that's on the census there. There's a chance that Oak Park might be. Clayton, do you have any?
Oak Park jumped out at me as a potential one, and I just quickly looked them up,
Yeah.
and they have a 19% black population.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Poverty, I don't know, yeah. So, thank you.
So do I have a motion to approve this list of initial peer communities?
Moved.
So did we finish the presentation? Because I feel like we jumped in pretty early, so I just want to check
okay.
with staff.
All right.
for sure.
So yeah, I mean, I can wrap up. The previous slide here was just to show my matrix and how big and scary it is in red, and just kind of to talk about how Evanston is unique, right? There are a lot of communities that don't have all the different functions of government on the right-hand side, that don't have a parks department, that don't have a water plant, that don't have a certified health department. So I think there are a lot of communities that compare well to each other, but Evanston is kind of an outlier in a lot of these ways. So that's kind of that penultimate slide. And then the final slide.
Except for Chicago. Chicago has all of that.
And then for the final slide, just to acknowledge the 7 that we are recommending is Skokie, Oak Park, Des Plaines, Bloomington, Palatine, Arlington Heights, and Park Ridge, which were the 7 that rose to the top using this methodology in this analysis. The next tier, if there were to be any to consider using the same methodology, would be Berwyn, Cicero, Elgin, Glenview, Mount Prospect, Oak Lawn, Orland Park, and Wheaton. I think on that list, our recommendation, maybe Elgin would be up at the top because that would be a city that's larger than us in population. Most of the other communities are smaller in population. But again, we're going to move forward. It sounds like we're going to move forward with the 7 that we have here for now.
Okay. So I guess we're ready to vote on that. Initially, the 7, we know it's going to grow from there. We don't want it to grow to 20, but we'll make sure that, and we might drop some, say they're just not representative, right? So.
And if I can speak quickly, Chair.
Yes.
I just want to say that I, support what Councilmember Reed said, and if we need to take a vote on it for it to be on our next agenda, we can do that. But it is really important to me that we add to the criteria. I won't say that we add to the list necessarily. I think we should allow the data to determine what the final list is or what the how we update the list as we move on. But I do think we need to add to the criteria, and I'd like to discuss that sooner than later. So if we need to take a vote to have it at our next meeting, we can do that. Or Chair, if you can commit to putting that on our next agenda for consideration.
I think
I'd
that
appreciate
this point is important enough to really drive out what is real relative to differences between Evanston and other communities. It's important enough that it should just be a standing item as you make progress throughout the year. Let's always have an item to discuss where we are and on the peer data set and what information we're collecting. It should be worth a brief discussion. I think we already blew our budget for this time, but it's an important thing. Let's just keep this on the agenda and talk about it every time, but sounds like we have consensus. Let's start with these 7 and get into the next phase. Maybe we add 2 more next time, but let's just get going.
Thank you, Chair.
Yep. So I guess we need a roll vote. Okay. Roll call.
Councilmember Kelly? Committee Member McMillan? Councilmember Nusma? Committee Member Rikus?
Aye.
Councilmember Burns?
Aye.
Councilmember Reed?
Aye.
Chair Livingston?
Aye. And Mike, good work on getting it. That grid is great. That grid is informative in and of itself, but, so. Okay. So now we're moving on to an item that is not an approval for a bond issuance. It is to sort of reauthorize at the expense, we've done for the last 2 years, reauthorize that the expenses that we are incurring could eventually be included in a bond issuance on a size to be determined and a timing to be determined, although I think we all think we're getting closer to that date given the state of the capital fund. But this is not a approval for a bond issuance in and of itself. So, Hitesh, if you'd like to just briefly discuss it, maybe we can make this into a 2-minute item.
Point of order, we need a motion on the floor first.
Okay. Okay, a motion to move on to item FB2.
Mr. Chair, I'll move discussion of
Second.
item, or actually, I will move approval of Resolution 15R24, which is item FB2.
Second.
Okay. Good evening, Chair, members of the committee. Yes, I absolutely agree. This is not an authorization to issue the bonds. We need a separate bond ordinance with the 2 readings, which would come after the finance budget and the council has kind of, So what this does is reimbursement resolution is a mechanism to reimburse the funds. Like suppose if we spend some money right now and the bonds are kind of issued after 2 months or 4 months or 6 months, if we have this resolution in place, we can reimburse out of that bond proceeds. So that's why we do this reimbursement resolution. Again, I know the City Council passed the reimbursement resolution in 22. We never issued the bonds. They did pass in 23 too, but we never issued the bond. So and no way this is a bond authorization. And to go into the detail, Lara, you want to come over here, talk about the money here?
Do we need to do that? You want to go through that level of detail on this, or can we? Again, it's not the authorization of a bond deal. Hitesh, whatever you would like to do, maybe we briefly go through, or very briefly go through the reserve, the spending that we want to include, but I don't think we need to get into the specifics, because that will eventually be sized based on what you recommend.
Right, ultimately.
Or based on what we discussed.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately the bond ordinance would come to you and like you would have to look at it and which projects and whatnot. Yeah, so there will be a detail. So it's up to the committee,
I mean, it seems to me that we've basically thrown out the budget that was adopted on, before. I mean, 5 days after our last meeting, all of a sudden there's, we're moving out of the building, we're signing a 15-year lease, we're buying Little Beans for $5 million. So, none of these numbers even make sense anymore. And none of this was brought to us. So to come to us and then ask for a debt issuance just seems kind of ridiculous to me, because we have absolutely no idea what you're even talking about anymore.
Those things happen, which was approved by the City Council, so yes.
Well, I mean, we're going to go back to that, because, 5 days prior, none of this was presented to any of us. And, we had meetings with other staff members where it was never brought up. So, I think asking us to approve almost anything right now until we have a robust conversation about what happened here, unless this is all just really performative. And, then some of us probably don't even want to be here anymore. I'm completely outraged by how that went down. I think it was, you clearly knew five days before that these things were coming out. So to come to us and ask for, additional debt when you don't even know what the number is, and we certainly don't, is ridiculous.
And I have a question.
Councilmember Kelly.
So in order to assess this also, I was in preparation for, we're going to have an audit soon, and I guess we'll get our final numbers at some point from 23. When I was reviewing because it says this is about to reimburse, there's mentioning of the water fund, CIP fund, library fund. So when I was reading through the last audit, there was a note about the long-term debt, and it said, note, if you could just clarify and explain to me what this means. It says, note, sewer fund, water fund. Now, I noticed that the IMRF runs about $48 million in the black. But it said, note, sewer fund, water fund, solid waste fund, parking fund, general fund have been used to liquidate the IMRF pension liability. Can you explain to me what that means? It's right here. It's on page 51 of the last audit. Because I just want to understand what that means.
Is this on topic for
Well, it is, because this is what part of the reason we're asking to consider issuing debt, but then it says it was used. I see the IMRF is about 48 million in the black, but then there's this note, I just want to understand that note.
So just point, I don't think we are asking to issue debt. We're
No,
asking
I
to
know, you need a
pass
tougher
the
hearing to issue
resolution.
debt. I understand that. This is, of course,
Just to
not
reserve the
issuing
spend.
debt.
This is not authorization, it's not
course it isn't.
sizing, it is to make sure.
It's all completely irrelevant.
I think the spending is real, and we're trying to reserve that we can use this spending as authorized expenditures for a future bond deal. And we have a certain amount of time where we have to qualify this spending to be included in a bond deal, or that spending does not qualify. It would just come out of the general fund. So again, it's just reserving that this money can be used for an eventual reimbursement out of a bond deal, if that bond deal.
Understood. I mean, we'd have to have hearings and everything else. But I just wanted some, I'm just trying to understand, because I see the IMRF is 48.359, about 48 plus $1 million in the black, and then I'm just trying to understand why it says we use these funds to liquidate IMRF pension liability.
IMRF is a multi-employer plan that we don't control the assets for. We just contribute like
Right.
it's defined contribution.
Right,
And
so, but
fortunately,
I
that
don't understand,
contribution's been
it says
enough.
we use, though, these funds, we used water and solid waste, and we just raised our water, went up like 17% this year, so I'm trying to understand what this, if you could just explain that to me, I just.
So, yeah, non-cash thing, that's purely accounting requirements, and it's like a, what do you call, required per our GASB rules. But yeah, no funds have been used out of the, like say, if you are understanding that, okay, if they use some, say, sewer fund balance or water fund balance, it's not that case,
But so when it's used to liquidate, what do you mean that this water fund is used to liquidate? I mean, if we're in the black.
There are
why?
some non-cash kind of transactions requirements, report for strictly from the accounting standpoint, and that's why we have to have that note out there indicating that. But yeah, I can share.
I'm still unclear.
But there's nothing, yeah, I don't know whether you thinking that, okay, whether we use some money out of parking fund or sewer fund balance.
But it's to liquidate a fund that's in the black, so I'm just trying to understand.
We're not, I don't
So-
think we are liquidating a fund that's in the
No, I'm
black.
just,
That's not
what it
our
said. That's
fund.
my question, though.
Okay,
It's like, why
maybe
does
Mr.
it-
Desai could
'cause we're-
reply to
so I can't
everyone on the
support
committee
this.
and post the
Right.
answer as to what that means.
Right,
I think there's a misunderstanding. If you could go through that in an appropriate way, post what that means.
Right.
So on that, I mean, it is related to this. That's why I'm bringing it up, because it ties into what we're looking at now. So if you could also on that, also on page then 64, it does say it has our net pension liability and the asset, the IMRF is in the black by that amount that I said, 48 million. Then it lists the police and fire, fighters' pension being, coming up to around 240 million. But then it says that our total pension liability is 191, making it appear as though we have paid that 48 million in the black towards the pension, towards those pensions. So I just want to ask, can you all, both the presidents of the pension funds, did we make a payment of 48 million towards down
Councilmember
on
Kelly,
the-
can I suggest, if we have questions on the pension balance disclosures, that we just include those on the agenda for next time? Because I
Although
don't
I-
think we're on point with this
Well-
question, which is just to reserve the spending.
Except that
I-
it's the water funds that we're saying we use to pay down debt liability of the IMRF, which is 48 million in the black, and then it also says, looks like we use the 48 million to pay down.
So I think we
our
have
total debt.
confusion
So-
on this point.
Does it help at all to
and-
note that we do have, that our water staff, our sewer staff, our solid waste staff, and our parking staff are all in IMRF? And so, like, we pay IMRF within those funds? And
I think there's some reporting confusion here. IMRF is not a fund that is on our balance sheet. That surplus, it does not just relate to Evanston. It's a multi-employer plan, which is very distinct from our fire and our police.
Right. No,
funds.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to be, I'm really not trying to be disruptive, except that amount that it's in the black is also figured, we see that there's a total reduction of the police and fire fund by the amount that's in the black by 48 million. And that's the way it appears. I'm just looking for clarification. I'm not saying that there's anything that anyone did wrong. That amount, 48 million, is used to offset the total debt on the police and fire. And so it looks like that was used somehow, that we, fungible funds, I don't know, like used it to pay down. So I just wanted clarification.
So, Mr. Desai, would it be okay if we have a discussion item on this point in the next meeting?
Sure.
Why don't we do that?
Okay.
Either
Okay.
way, we can include this as an agenda item. And I don't know whether, I have a hard time kind of connecting to the system.
Or just reply to everyone.
Liabilities, pension liabilities, police and fire, and they might have netted for just the description. But in reality, all the funds are separate. Nobody transfers from one pension fund to the other fund. So for the reporting, yes, that, okay, the two funds, police and fire have this liability, IMRF has this positive balance, so the net pension liability is this. But they are separate kind of entity, they are separately, nothing kind of commingled in terms of assets or liabilities.
So very good. In order, we have 30 minutes left, or we go to 7? Did we go to 7, or did we go to 6:30? Next committee at 7, so go over a little bit. I'm ready to vote on this point to reserve the money. Okay? So is there anyone, Councilmember Burns or Reed, is there anything you would like to add on this point, since I can't see if anyone has their hand up?
Yeah, I did have my hand up, but I'll just be very quick and won't respond to some of the discussion earlier. But I do want to highlight one. I do want to highlight that it was said, I think, a number of times that this is not authorization for funding. Sure, that's kind of semantics. It's essentially pre-authorization, if you will. It doesn't authorize the exact expenditure, but it encourages the expenditure by granting a way to pay for it down the road. So I think that has to be clear. I do also want to highlight, while I'm not enthusiastic about issuing new bonds quite yet, I do think it is important to highlight the work that the city has done thus far to roll off our bond debt. I think maybe it's changed. Is it 36 million at this point, or has it gone up since the last few months or the last year? I think it's important to highlight, that we've done some good work with rolling off debt for our taxpayers. I don't want to see us resaddle the taxpayers with that debt in one swoop, but I do think it's important, for us to continue the work to try to create more of a mix of capital expenditures, not solely relying on bond issuance. I think we can probably get some guidance from GFOA, and maybe our benchmark communities will be able to provide some guidance for us. I don't think it's the standard that communities exclusively rely on bond debt to fund capital improvements. And I really think, that has been the norm, at least for the last, 10, 15 years here in Evanston. I really think it's time to start moving away from that. This council has, in some regards, started to move away from that. I just don't want to see us backslide. And I think we really need to focus on figuring out what the right blend is. Is it 50-50? Is it 75-25? Whatever the case may be, I think we really need to pin that down. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we have someone want to make a motion?
Motion's on the table, so we can.
It already is on the table. I'm ready to vote on it, if people are.
Councilmember Kelly?
No.
Committee Member McMillan?
No.
Councilmember Nusma?
Aye.
Committee Member Rikus?
Aye.
Councilmember Burns?
Aye.
Councilmember Reed?
No.
Chair Livingston?
Aye. Okay, very good. Okay, so now we're going on to our discussion items. I'm wondering if, in light of the time, do we want to move credit card fees to last after? And if we don't get to it, we bring it up in the next meeting, or is that critical?
Point of, or I don't know, if I may make a motion, Councilmember Kelly, this is your item, so maybe I should leave this to you, but I think if we move this to the next meeting so we can actually, I'm genuinely interested in this. I think it's worthy of discussion. I don't want that discussion to be rushed or other discussions to be rushed for this item.
That's fine.
Was that with respect to the credit card fees or the property tax loss factor?
The credit card fees, and maybe both, depending on how long
I'd like to leave
we
the
expect.
property tax loss factor on, that's important. Represents a larger sum of money than in terms of, than what we're discussing when we talk about credit card fees. So I'd like to keep that one on there.
So there's a motion to move D2 to next meeting.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
So I officially make that motion, I guess, if I didn't already.
Second. Okay.
Vote. It's the chair's
Do we need to vote?
prerogative.
Okay, so we're going to move D2 to the next meeting. It's an important thing, and there's some things to consider, for sure. All right. And I'm confident D3 can be very short. So let's get to the property tax loss factor discussion.
Do you want to do a motion to move discussion of the item?
I'll move item D1 for discussion.
I'm doing it for discussion.
All right, so each year the city, and we have a memo kind of walking through this, but each year the city passes 4 property tax levies. The city property tax levy, this includes the general fund, IMRF, human services, solid waste, and the public safety pension funds. It passed the library levy, the general assistance levy, and the debt service levy. Given non-payment, appeals, and other factors outside of the city's control, Cook County allows taxing bodies to include a loss factor as part of that levy. The city always brings in less than the gross amount levied, so we give Cook County the gross amount, and every year we bring in less than that gross amount, and that amount is what we use to set a loss factor. Cook County allows up to a 3% loss factor for non-debt service levies and up to 5% for debt service levies. The city's budget and the numbers you see in the budget are the net levy, so that's what we budget to receive.
It says gross.
The amount shown in the budget. So
Oh, in
each
the
year,
budget.
whenever we set the budget for these individual levies, we budget the net levy.
What they collected, but in the actual budget, when we
Correct.
issue our
So,
levy, it's based on the net?
Clarifying the terminology.
Yes, so, and this table contains several memos, or this item contains a memo that has several tables showing the gross levy and the actual amount we collected against that gross levy for the past 6 years. As it shows, debt service has trended the lowest. They have the lowest average, a loss factor as high as 3.7% in 2018. And then in 2020, our loss factor in the general fund was right at the 3% that we currently use. If you look at the other years, we've brought in a bit more than the net levy, anywhere between 97% in 2020 and a high of 98.6%. So we tend to vary between this 1.5% and 3%, at least in the general fund levy. The property tax levy, it's one of the city's most reliable revenues. We set a levy and we generally receive the amount that we levy. If you look at other taxing bodies, we took a look at a few. School districts in particular, they maximize the loss factor at the 5% and 3% that's allowable by Cook County. Municipalities vary, with some doing as low as 1%, others 1 to 3% allowable. So we provided this information. We're certainly open to discussion and feedback from this committee. Just important to note that in 2013, the property tax levy was 20% of general fund expenses. As part of our budget we just passed, it's down to 7.9%. So over the last 10 years, the property tax levy has become a significantly smaller part of what we use to be able to pay for general fund expenses. So this is certainly one way that communities can adjust the levy, but we certainly, we've held it flat for 4 years, and any measure taken to reduce that levy any further, I don't think staff at this point would be supportive of, but if we're able to, set the loss factor more appropriately, then we're certainly open to that feedback.
Thank you.
Councilmember has light on first, and then Councilmember Kelly.
Yeah, thank you, Clayton. I just have a question. I'm curious why the percentages are different between the different levies, because it's not as if when I pay my tax bill, I choose to pay only a portion of it. I either pay it or I don't. So why are the numbers different? I'm just curious.
And that's a good question, but yeah, we have a separate account set up for each agency, so whatever the money we get it, I don't know why it differs to a certain extent. The couple of things which I would answer, which I think brought up earlier, because one thing which was brought up as a loss factor of net levy comparison, that, yeah, we are lower compared to gross levy. So I think I did look at the numbers based from our audit report, and then I compared the net levy from 2005 to 2013, almost 10 years. There were only 2 years, and I'm again comparing to the net levy, where we were little over 100% in 2006 and 2013. But otherwise, we were like 99.9, 98.9, 98.1, 98.7, 98.8, 99.7, and 99.7 in 2012. And this is compared to a net levy.
So I think that that's a critical point. You're saying that we're not collecting more than the levy.
Right.
With what we're using as a loss factor, which I assume increases what goes out on people's bills,
Right.
net of what we didn't get paid for, we are very close to the approved levy.
Right, and it depends on years. Like, these are some of the years, I think, after the 2008-9, kind of recession and the economy downturn. The other thing here, the question was that, okay, what if we get more? Where does that go? Does it go in general fund? No. The dedicated tax agencies are kind of tied up with that respective bank account. So we have no control. Like police pension fund directly gets the money from county. It doesn't touch the city bank account. Fire pension gets directly from there. So if they get 98% or 102%, it is with them. So we don't come into the picture, These are the tax agencies, separate tax agencies with a dedicated pension fund bank account.
Councilmember Kelly.
So you're not making, I'm sorry, before I turn it over to Councilmember Kelly. It sounds like our assumptions have been working. You're not recommending we change them.
I mean, I won't recommend, debt service would be the one, but they allow 5%. Is the reason is those are the mandatory payments, the bond payments, So that's why the Cook County allows this. If you want, I don't know whether we want to go anywhere between 3 to 5% there in debt service, I'm a little bit flexible there, but in general fund and others, and I think I still don't have the data that 2 years or 3 years back, we ended up giving the police and fire pension some extra money, which combined around $200,000 to make it to the 100%. So, I would be a little bit,
I guess, philosophically, what I would like to do is, make an assumption which is validated by some past history, unless there's any reason to expect the future would be different, not try and play games with it.
Right.
Let's just pick a number that.
3% might be a good number for all, yes, so which would reduce our debt service levy, yes.
Okay, that's all.
So I think putting a gross levy here is really distorting the percent. So, for example, we have exceeded the net levy almost every single year, except 1 year we came in about even. So, like I just, I did the calculations for 22, and we actually exceeded our net levy, which is what we need as a city, by over $1 million in 22. In $1,051,593 in 22. But the problem is we can't see when you give us the gross. Makes it look as though it makes it look as though we're coming under. So I think it's really important that this chart is represented to us. Again, I started doing the math, and every year except for one, we exceeded on average over $1 million. Every year, we're collecting over more than $1 million than what we are netting. So this, my colleagues here can't see this, and Mr. Newsmith seems to think that, we're just hitting it, but we aren't. So I would ask that if we could. What's the number you're looking at for 2022? So for 2022, I had to go into several different documents, but if you look at 22, for example, our net levy, I took the general fund, all the 4 different funds, took the net levy plus what we collected. I can compare a number to what we're looking at. Okay, so I'm looking at, we don't have the net there, but the net levy total is, I'll read off each number. For 22. So the net levy total is, I'm going to read you each of what the net levy was in the general fund, 33 million, it's going to be 4 big numbers, but 33,216,664. And then the net levy for general assistance was, I just put 1.3, I didn't write out the full number, 1.3. Library net levy was 7.252 million. And then the debt service was well, the total amount, just a moment. In the general fund, we ended up with 493,000 more than we needed in '22. The net versus what we collected in the general fund, 33,709,367. For example, just in '22, net levy for the general fund, 30. So that left us with, I just take the general fund for that, 33,216,000. Okay, so that's the problem. That's my whole point. They needed to put the net. You can't see here.
I can show you here on the screen, just focusing just on general fund. I think the numbers Councilmember Kelly used sounded very accurate, without having them in front of me too. In '22, we brought in 33.7 million as it shows. The net levy was 33.2 million. So she's correct that we brought in 500,000 more than what the net levy was there.
But that's just the general fund, though, Jonathan. I just want to make that clear. The total was over $1 million.
Let me just clarify. The net levy was 33,216,000.
Correct.
And we arrived at that net levy because the gross levy was 34,243.
So take 3% off that gets you the net levy. Correct.
If everyone pays their taxes, we should be getting the gross levy. We're still not getting it all.
No.
Right? We're still not getting all of it. We're assuming we're going to lose some, and some years we lose more or less, but we never get everything that's owed to us.
So the net levy is what, if everybody paid their taxes, we would get the net. The gross is when they add the allowable loss factor on. And I do want to point out, we have, right, the gross is the net plus the allowable loss factor. Yes. So that's
Calculated.
not, so you would
Cook
actually.
County calculates it. Cook County, you would give them the gross levy. They take 3% off of it to get the net levy. I don't know if that's the
So
same.
the net levy is minus those percent from the gross. But I do want to point out, we are maxing out what and we're.
Just add that column.
I think we really need that net levy. And where we stand in regards to the net levy to see like we're 101% over. So I think that's the number we need to see, not make it appears like we're under.
Yeah.
So I think that's the number we need, because we are actually generating over $1 million in excess taxes every year. And I did a little research. I called Skokie and talked to them to ask them what they do. They don't issue any allowable loss factor for their levies except for the debt service levy. That one they do, but the other ones they don't. I checked with Wilmette. They issue, I'll just tell you, just to give folks an idea, and we don't need to be issuing this much. We don't need to max out like we do. In Wilmette, they said they issue every year 1% on debt service and 0.5% on all their other levies, just to have an idea. Like, not everybody we really max out to the maximum. And I don't think we need to if we're generating this kind of money. And then I'd also, or else we should come up with a policy. If we're going to generate an extra $1 million that's above and beyond what we levy, then that goes towards reducing our levy. Or I think we really need to just cut this down. Like, we don't need to be levying at 3 and 5%.
Isn't it not prudent to be somewhat conservative on your revenue estimates so you don't end up in the hole if the revenue estimates don't come to full fruition?
And a couple of things, like what the chair said. Okay, if we are getting 100%, we should be getting the gross levy, because that's what we levy. The second thing, sometimes what happens is, like in police and fire pension, right? They get their money, so indirectly you are contributing more money to them. In the general fund even, sometimes it sits in the fund balance, like suppose, okay, we added 3%. I mean, next year when we talk about that, okay, whether we need to raise the tax levy in human service fund and the other, where we levy, general assistance fund. If we have more money indirectly, we don't raise that. Oh, we need extra 100,000? No, because we have the money, So ultimately it kind of nets out. I mean, if you say, okay, no loss factor starting this year, next year, and we might, say, yeah, let's raise the levy by 50,000, 100,000 too.
Yeah.
So it's, I'm open to any ideas.
But if we could look at this, just to clarify the argument, we're looking at city property tax levy here. We have assumed a 3% non-collection rate, which would mean if that prediction came true mathematically precisely, the numbers in the far right column would be 97%.
97.
right? And so what we actually took in was slightly higher than what we budgeted for, 97.5, 97.6, 2020 spot on with the 3% assumption. A couple of other, so we're not, like, we're really darn close. You have to make an assumption. And could we reasonably look at these numbers and say, okay, assume 2% instead of 3%? Yeah, we could, but then we'd be coming up short in some years. So
Right. I mean, and the numbers which I gave you for the, like, in particular, why I highlighted those 7, 8 years, I mean, it's unfortunately not there because I just collected over the weekend and the memo was out. Those are the years post that 2008 year, you know, whether we had the economy. I mean, we had some years where it was like very low collections, you know, and these are all net levy, except 2 years, 8 years. During that time frame between 2005 and 14, we had a less than 100% of the net levy collections.
Can we move on to the civic
So,
civic
wait,
center?
I just-
Let's just, you know.
But
If
we
I
are,
can jump
$1
in quick,
million
Chair, I haven't
is a
spoken
lot
yet on
to
this
be
item.
generating unnecessarily, and that is on
can bring
average.
item
Well, we're
back
not
next
generating
time.
unnecessarily. Like, we're just, it's,
So you're building surpluses is what you're doing.
Chair,
yeah.
Yeah.
Collections were better.
Yeah.
Jack, that's all right.
Hi, Chair, I'm sorry. I think someone from the,
You know
Chair,
what,
if I may
Jack-
ask a
Jack-
question.
They're levied a tax for the pension. If we take in more than that net levy, does that go to the pensions, or does it go into the great maw of the general fund?
I think
That's a
Mr.
legitimate
Desai
question.
just said it goes to the pension, if more than 100% comes in. It directly goes to the pension. It doesn't run through the city, it goes through the pension.
So they should have seen about
So we've-
300,000
We,
then
we
from
are talking
22.
about, relatively minor amounts here. There's always going to be a difference between what gets billed and actual. So I do think we need, Mr. Desai, if you, maybe in the next meeting, just give us a multi-year summary, right? This has
With
been
the
within
net,
a net that
with
we've
the net
gotten.
levy. It's
and-
with the net
and we
levy and the
should-
percent based on the net levy.
I can tell you.
Let me go back.
include
But I think
more years.
there's always going to be some variance. It's not a big
If 3%
one.
is the assumption, like that number is built in, you could do the math here. Over from 2018 through 2023, the average of these numbers here is at 2.16%,
Yeah.
So we,
right? And
So it appears
we're bringing
that
in a
the-
little bit
it-
more
it-
than our conservative assumption.
It appears that the debt
Chair, real
service
quick,
levy is
I
too
know
high.
some governing bodies do open forum, but I think it's very difficult for some, for an
Yeah.
audience that has not followed along
I-
with this
I
committee
agree,
to follow us.
Councilmember
So
Burns.
please, if we could go
Right.
back to one person at a time. Thank you.
That's fine.
And
I-
Chair,
I
I've had my hand
suggest-
up for a while and have not spoken on this item yet.
Okay,
I
Mr.
believe.
Councilmember Reed, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to highlight one thing. I think it was starting to be highlighted, but by Mr. Martell and others. But Councilmember Newsom mentioned that if we make an assumption that's too low, then the city has to make up the income. But I think the whole point of this is when we make an assumption that's too high, we take money out of our community. And right now we have a general fund excess reserve that is upwards of, 25 million in the excess above our reserve policy. And that means that those funds are not in our community, supporting our small businesses, allowing parents to pay for childcare. And it means that we're just holding and hoarding that money and making banks richer so they can borrow the money out to other folks. And so I just really think it's important for us to be conservative with this. And when we have such a large excess fund, for us to be even more gracious to our residents with these with this policy. And so I would support us looking at reducing the loss factor and not maxing it out. If we can go down to 2%, if we can go down to 1% this year, next year, because
I think the one item that needs to be evaluated is, do you think the property tax levy is, the loss factor is too high? Because you look at all these, we are plus or minus the number every year, but having a 5%, is it a 5%? 5% on the debt service levy does appear like it could be high. So maybe we ask you to come back with a recommendation on that one. I will also say, we've run 2 years in a row of almost $10 million deficits. We have to get over this view that there's a lot of excess money. There currently is in the general fund, but we are burning through it.
It's overspending, not deficit. It's overspending, just to be clear.
It's hard for me to believe that we're burning through it when the last few years it's only grown.
That's
But I hear what
incorrect.
you're
It
saying.
has dropped the last 2 years, right? It has dropped. We are quickly evaporating the excess reserves that came about in 20 and 21, which relates to another item that we have coming up. But I would recommend we ask Mr. Desai to come back next time and reevaluate the property tax debt service loss factor and evaluate it. Should it be 4%? Should it be 3%?
I just have one little point. I know everyone wants to move on, but just with the net, but not just the total. Like this is just the general fund. So, I mean, all told, in the total amount that we have been collecting, I think that's important. Not, to see the net and the actual and what we brought in over. And I think we're going to see that it's on average over $1 million every year. And I concur with Councilmember Reed. Thank you. And I want to say many communities are very proud of the fact that they don't do it at all. They say, well, that's why we have reserves if someone doesn't pay. And a lot of times the money trickles in later, whether it's through tax sales and others. So many communities simply don't. And I did have one question, though. You mentioned in the budget, you said a loss factor is applied to all levies by Cook County. What do you mean by Cook County? I just wondered what that.
They apply the loss factor, so we give them the numbers in the ordinance, which is a gross levy, but we have to mention that this includes this percentage of the loss factor, and they would apply, yeah. I mean, in one case, we had a kind of, and they have like a little different calculation. It's not like times, like they take the net levy, and where there is a 3% loss factor, they divide by 0.97 to come up with the gross levy. So we have to be careful. That's not a simple math like net levy times 1 or 3%. It's a little different. So, but the Cook County, yeah, they applied. So we have to kind of put it that this is the gross levy, including the loss factor, and they've checked the numbers, and then they would say, yeah, it is applicable. Yeah, we can allow that. Ultimately, they have the right.
But it says that it's applied by Cook County.
I mean, applied by means. That's, yeah, we have to mention we put it in the ordinance that this is the gross levy, including the loss factor,
And Cook County applies it?
Yeah, we have to, because it is like, as I said, it is applicable in debt service up to 5%. So we have to say what percentage, right?
No, I understand that it's 3% and 5%,
Right,
the maximum. It just was looking, it looks like you're.
This is,
Okay.
should be a very simple and boring conversation, because we're just fine-tuning an assumption is all we're doing
It
here.
looks like the one, come back next time with, do you think we can adjust that?
Yes.
All right. And who holds the excess money? Can I ask, is it Cook County or is it us?
No, we get it, like as I
get it.
said, police pension, whatever.
No, but for debt service, we're not paying more interest or principal because we have we do better than our loss factor.
Right, I mean, it sits in the debt service fund. It
Sits in the debt service fund.
If it's a general fund, human
But
service fund.
we hold the excess
Right.
cash and earn
It's not Cook
interest on
County.
the excess cash.
It's not the Cook County.
Very good. Okay. All right. For item D3, if I could just short circuit this. I looked at the information that was provided, and it appears that, based on everything we know now, we are still very close to the estimated general fund reserve level and 2023 deficit at this time, based on everything you know. It is a minor difference. We had the 1 year, a couple of years ago, huge amount of, unanticipated increase came through at the end of the year. Right now, it appears that, in effect, everything is very much in line with the deficit, but also that the ending fund balance, which is on page 23 of 29 of 48.8, is the final numbers that we had were 49.1 when you did the last, when the budget was approved and what the forecast was for the year. So I don't think there's anything to discuss here right now, okay, that there is, this year at least, we are not seeing a large gap develop between what we assumed 23 was going to be and what '23 now appears to be. But you still have bills coming through, but we're in line. We're not seeing a big change. So I think that if everyone's okay with that, that is really the core of item D3. I don't think there's anything else to really, in the interest of time, and that can get us on to D4. We do have some extra time, but the next meeting's at 7, if people can say, but we desperately need to get to this discussion regarding the Civic Center and Police and Fire headquarters.
So moved.
Okay. All right.
Point of order, I don't know if I heard a second.
Second. Can I second it? I'm seconding it. Okay, we're moving on to the last item on the agenda.
Hello, members of the committee. My name is Laura Biggs. I'm the city engineer. And so I'm here to reprise a discussion that was had at City Council related to the Civic Center Police Fire Headquarters relocation study. There is a complete presentation that was given at the January 22nd meeting. This is a condensed version of that presentation, but there's more information available in the council packet from that date. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I was here previously last July, actually, to discuss some of our capital improvement program challenges that we were experiencing as we were pulling together the 2024 capital improvement program. And I showed this table, which I'm now updating, and I'm sorry because it is a bit on the small side, but essentially we have 6 facilities that are sort of our problem facilities. And at the time that I was here, we had 2 of the facilities where we had sort of identified plans for how to deal with those facilities. The rest of them, we had plans in flux. Since then, as of the January 8th meeting at City Council, we presented information on the Service Center Master Plan, and we're moving forward with that. We actually last night awarded the first project out of the Service Center Master Plan. Then we also last night awarded the awarded the renovation of the Ecology Center. So we now have those buildings that are listed below the line. Those 3 facilities are ones in which we have identified plans, council has given direction, and we are moving forward with getting those plans implemented. The 3 above, we are in the process of identifying the plans to move forward still. And those are the Police Fire Headquarters, the Civic Center, and Noise Cultural Arts Center. So the relocation feasibility study had to do with the Civic Center and the Police Fire Headquarters. This was originally awarded in October 2021. It has been a little bit lengthened in being rolled out and getting to results, as we've had a number of changes in city management that really slowed down the process. And but the gist of the scope of the services was focused on both the Civic Center and the Police Fire Headquarters, and included an assessment of the space needs, which is also called the programming for those 2 buildings, identification of public-private partnerships, assessment of potential sites if we wanted to relocate the facilities ultimately, and recommendation of options that were actionable on how we could proceed. Now, we initially did talk to the current city council about their interest in public-private partnership, and at the time that we discussed that, there wasn't very much interest. That has changed a little bit based on the feedback we received in January. So we are now looking at that, but I don't really have well-developed information on potential public-private partnerships yet. So one of the key findings from the study was this space needs or programming. The Civic Center, which can be calculated as the available space a number of different ways. I've seen it everything up to 120,000 square feet, but in this particular study, it was identified as 104,000 square feet, but they were able to show that actually what we really need, if we were located in a facility that didn't have a lot of extra wide hallways and other types of necessarily inefficient use of space, we could get by with 62,000 square feet. So it is a substantial reduction, 42,000 square feet, in what we actually need. On the flip side of that, the Police Fire Headquarters, which is currently at around 57,000 square feet, based on best management practices and industry guidelines, should be operating in a much larger facility at 92,000 square feet. So we're really looking at a situation where neither building is meeting our needs. This building has some potential for renovation. The police fire headquarters, I wish to be very clear out of this, that based on what we've learned and what we know about that building, it is just simply not appropriate for a police station. And with the ADA and building code problems that building has experienced, its lack of compliance, both this consultant, our own staff, we do not believe that building should be reused or expanded. It really just needs to be replaced. So we didn't have very specific criteria, but talking to city council members and staff, and primarily city council members though, as well as the consultant, this was the list of things that we were looking at as we evaluated the potential location sites. So looking at making sure that regardless of what happens with the Civic Center, that there would always be adequate parking within a reasonable distance of the building, and that parking would be free to the residents. Access to transit via the Davis Street station. The reason why that transit hub location is particularly important is that we have a number of bus lines that go through Evanston. This particular site, for example, while it is relatively closely located to the CTA and L, is not really that closely located to most of the bus lines. But Davis Street Station is where all of the bus lines stop, as well as the L and the Metro. So when we talk about being co-located or located within what would be a quarter-mile distance of mass transit, that is the optimal in terms of mass transit to be located, because it really intersects with all of the options for mass transit for the city. Supporting downtown Evanston revitalization was a specific goal of this study, and determining how we could move forward with that. There was an expressed interest to not decrease the amount of property that is on the property tax rolls. And so any options that we were looking at were really evaluated closely with that. And in fact, trying to determine if we could increase the amount of property on the property tax rolls. Making a commitment to our climate action resiliency plan, improving the efficiency of our workspaces and our productivity, and improving customer service for the residents of Evanston. So there's a lot of information in the report, which is posted on our city website. However, the gist of it is, as we looked at it, there are really three options for the police fire headquarters. We can demolish the existing building and rebuild it on the same site. We can rebuild it on a new site that is located preferably closer to the downtown, but maybe up more on the fringes just for ease of access of police vehicles. Or we can rebuild this at the Civic Center site, which is property that we already own. For the Civic Center, what we identified is that we could renovate the existing building. We could co-locate with the police fire headquarters wherever the police fire headquarters is being built, or we could rent office space downtown. So ultimately, those were the options that were looked at and truly costed. They are the six options that were presented do not represent all of the permutations of these different options, but they were the six most logical. So there were six options presented. We narrowed it to six for purposes of being able to provide costs and comparisons. So the first option is rebuilding the police fire headquarters on the current site and renovating the current Civic Center. The estimated cost of this comes out to $159 million. The challenges with this particular option were listed in more detail in the report, but because of the amount of work that needs to be done on the police headquarters site, which I can just say on the Elmwood site to make this simpler to say, or here at 2100 Ridge, it is pretty involved, and you have to phase the construction. And once you do that, you lengthen out the schedule and you increase the cost. So this ended up being more costly and would take longer to implement. The advantage of renovating on this site is that we actually already own the site. That's pretty straightforward how we work out that partnership. There would probably be excess space available once we were done renovating the site. It is not within a quarter mile of the Davis Street Transit Hub. The police fire headquarters is a more complicated thing because of the amount of space that they need. Doubling it on the current site is really pretty challenging, and we would probably need to acquire additional property near there. Not a lot, we would build up more, but just in order to be able to phase it. Oh, whoops. Scenario B we went into then was rebuilding police fire headquarters on the current site, lease the Civic Center office space in downtown. The challenges with police fire headquarters are pretty similar. The advantages to leasing Civic Center office space downtown is we're getting the Civic Center staff and operations that draw the residents to the building into the downtown, so it's better supportive of downtown revitalization. The access is better in terms of transit because you're closer to the Davis Street Transit Hub, and you can move this property onto the tax rolls. So that's the short summary of that. The estimated cost for that is $147 million. Scenario C was to rebuild police fire headquarters on the Farmers Market site, which is it's on Maple Avenue, next to the Maple Avenue Garage, towards the northwest corner of the downtown, and leasing the Civic Center office space. So the advantage of putting police fire headquarters on the Farmers Market site, and later we talk about another site that's sort of across Maple Avenue from the Maple Street Garage. Being in that area puts you within that quarter mile from the Davis Street Transit Hub, and it allows us to use our city parking garages in order to help provide parking for all of the vehicles that are necessary. So when we look at our parking garages, we have a number of vacant spaces. They're not really fully utilized, particularly since we're post-pandemic. At its peak use, Sherman Garage typically has around 650 empty spaces a day. Maple Garage has more like 1,100 vacant spaces a day at its peak use. So that is a lot of spaces that could be repurposed for police vehicles, for residents, for Civic Center staff. One of the challenges of the police fire headquarters that we've experienced is that the police station utilizes a lot of vehicles for their operations. Their parking is really tapped out. In fact, we have way too many vehicles parking on too small of a site right now, the way that it is. So when we start looking at what are we going to do with all these police vehicles, we really need to consider parking in any option that we're doing. Building a parking deck that would support those vehicles, which is what we would need to do if we stayed on the Elmwood site that exists, is about $13 to $20 million, depending on the number of vehicles. So anytime we can leverage one of our underutilized parking assets, first of all, there's just the CARP alignment from better utilizing existing assets and not constructing new things you don't need, but also we would save a substantial amount of money if we can reutilize the Maple Garage. So when we looked at all of the options that property that's not currently on the tax rolls in or near the downtown area, which is largely Northwestern University, anytime we can get really close to one of our parking garages, it improves our ability to be cost effective in how we do this. So some of the weaknesses of this, though, is we don't own the Farmers Market site. Northwestern University does. And similar with the 906 University Place site that we look at in a couple more options. We have had 2 meetings with Northwestern University so far. The first to say, hey, we are interested potentially in acquiring a property of yours in the downtown area, and these 2 seem like they are possibilities. And the second one was when they got back with us and they said, we might be willing to consider that. We would negotiate. And that is, as far as the conversation has gone, there isn't really anything more to report on that. And I don't think that that's their guarantee that they would give us the property, and nor is it our guarantee that we would take one of the properties. So it's something still to be negotiated, which is going to lengthen the amount of time that it takes to move forward on whatever the selected option is. The other thing I will say about the farmers market site, it's not built on right now. There isn't a particularly good understanding of what the soils conditions are. There would need to be a due diligence related to that. It is our experience that sites that are near the railroad tracks tend to have a lot of soil contamination and have other challenges. So it is something to be cognizant of. Scenario D, these start to get to be permutations. Scenario D is actually rebuilding police fire headquarters on this 2100 Ridge site while we renovate the Civic Center. It allows us to utilize some of the excess space that we would develop if we did a gut rehab of this particular building for our police fire operations, but it would in no way be all the space that the police fire operation needs in order to operate. We would also, most likely to manage all of the vehicles, have to build a parking deck here. So these things are feasible, but I think we recognize that having the police station here, building a parking deck on this site, and increasing the vehicle traffic in and out of this area in that sort of way at all times of the day and night would potentially have an impact on the residential character of this neighborhood. The fifth option was acquiring 906 University Place and developing an integrated civic center and police fire headquarters. So the benefit of that and the next option, scenario F, which is the same thing but at the farmers market site, once we start combining buildings, we do start seeing economies of scale. Putting both of these operations adjacent to the Maple Street garage really allows us to utilize an underutilized parking asset to basically to provide a portion of the infrastructure that we would otherwise have to build. And we would move both operations into the downtown to support the downtown revitalization, improve access via mass transit with the Davis Street transit hub. But we still have those issues that we would see, that we would really need NU cooperation to make either of these options work. And 906 University Place is currently occupied as an NU operation, which they've indicated that they may be willing to, in the very cursory conversations we've had, they may be willing to relocate, but they have not given us any kind of degree of certainty on that, nor do I think they have a plan currently on how that would happen. So all of these, the least expensive option is at the level of granularity we're looking at, which is pretty vague at this point, is acquiring the farmers market site, building one building there for both of our operations. It does rely on things that we do not control in order to make it happen. And with that, we talked with the city council then on next steps. So basically, we recognize, as does the city council, that we really do need to have public engagement that happens because of the amount of turnover that has happened since this study was initially scoped. We're putting together a plan for that public engagement now, and we will move ahead with reaching out to NU to talk about more detail how we could go about acquiring one of these properties if that ends up being the decision of the city council. But then obviously the third piece of this is to identify the funding for any of these options. Any one of them is outside the scope of what we normally would budget for our regular capital improvement program. I think it is reasonable to assume that we would have to, for most of these, well, for all of these options, we would need to increase our debt cap in order to be able to sell a big enough bond, if that is how we choose to do the funding. But in the historical way that we have funded the capital improvement program, we do not have another source of funding yet identified for these options. And that is where the discussion with this committee becomes really critical. And with that, that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Leslie, I'd like to go on.
I guess I have to take it with a grain of salt that this is a critical committee when 5 days before, when we were here before, going through finalizing the budget, none of this was mentioned. $3.5 million for Little Beans wasn't mentioned. So we really had no time to contemplate this at all. My question is, that's a comment obviously, has the lease been signed, the 15-year lease?
The lease is currently under negotiation.
Has it been signed yet?
No, it is currently under negotiation.
And who would be the person responsible for signing that? Would it be Luke Stowe?
Yes.
Okay. It's disappointing to read about these kind of things in the paper that have obviously been, done around the committee. And it makes me wonder what exactly we think the purpose of the committee is. If it isn't to, talk about these sorts of things, then I think it's purely performative. And I'd put that to the chair. This should have been something that we had a long conversation about. It's disappointing. And, I just can't understand it. And I can't understand how we think that it's going to cost $500 some odd a square foot to renovate the facility. A lot of these figures I think need to be challenged. And I think it should be challenged by the capital expenditures or the capital budget group within this. And, Sherry and I had a meeting with you a little over a month ago, and none of this, it was sort of this thing that could possibly happen, but none of the figures or even the, possibility of signing a 15-year lease with a $9 million, opt-out at 7 years came up. And it's disappointing. Sherry, maybe you can chime in.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with what decisions were made. I just think it's the process, and that when we spent a lot of time as a committee on the budget, and these are two items that were not on the budget, so I would like maybe to add to the agenda in the future that expenditures over a certain amount that were not budgeted for come to our committee first, because it's, again, I heard about it through the media. I didn't, and then I went to the council website to see, but I didn't even know about this, and we had met 5 days earlier. So, I'm just more disappointed with the process than all the decisions that were made.
Councilmember and then we'll go to Councilmember Reed has his hand up, but.
Yeah. So I think, it's a lack of transparency, because in the end, the decision was made publicly in like a 45-minute period. A huge decision to move, to potentially lease a place, upheaval of the Civic Center, to move into some place for 15 years, and potentially build another building. That's a terrible thing to do in our community, especially we have a Finance and Budget Committee. This should have come up through Finance and Budget Committee. I also want to say, 15-year lease is ridiculous. This is the softest market office buildings, for office buildings that we've seen in decades. That's crazy when we're talking, no building takes 15 years to build or 7 years. We're not, and to rehab this building, how many years, nothing's falling down. We're all in here fine. This room is beautiful. A 15-year lease with the opt-out at 7 years at $8.8 million. We're just really, this is just, makes no sense whatsoever. There are certainly, I know there are short-term options out there, and that's what we should be doing. We should be looking at the total cost. We shouldn't be, out there looking for the best annual, rate, because if we go 20 years or we go 15 years, it's going to be less. We should be talking about the total cost to taxpayers. And if the 15-year lease is not getting us a deal that we should be getting for taxpayers, that's just a ridiculous idea. I also want to say we were not presented, and I have to say all this because all we got was 45 minutes with council. It was, rushed through in a special order of business, really inappropriate. A phased-in option. Certainly there's a phase-in option. We have, just a fraction of our employees are here on any given day. That certainly is an option that should be presented to us, along with a geothermal paid for in large part with federal funds through the IRA grants. None of that was presented to us at all. That wasn't an option that was presented. Really the lowest possible cost. This idea of $63 million to rehab, people are laughing at that number. That's not what's needed in order to stay here, to be able to stay here in a way that's that makes it comfortable for everybody, certainly that number is at least twice as high as it needs to be. So the public, the council was not presented with alternatives that could be far more cost-saving. I feel I agree with Sherry and Leslie. It should have come through this. Oh, and of course, as we, jack up our debt ceiling, our bond rating is going to take a hit also for that. So this whole plan is just really not in the interest of the city. It's fiscally irresponsible. It lacks transparency. So I think as a committee, we should issue a statement of, a statement of, I don't know if it's disapproval or just because we don't want history to repeat itself. It's not enough to say, going forward, we're going to do this. I mean, this is really serious what happened, that this whole committee was just disregarded as council, as Mayor Biss went forward and put this as a special order of business to be voted on. So highly inappropriate. I hope that we as a council as a committee can issue some sort of a statement that will ensure the residents that this won't happen again. Thank you.
I would like to respond just briefly to the cost of the building and that it seems high. So this building does need a lot of work associated with it. The HVAC and the electrical are both really sort of, especially the HVAC is at the end of its useful life. In order to align with climate action goals, but also in order to meet modern building codes, we really need to replace the electrical, which is sort of tapped out anyway in capacity. And often, you find things like breakers that trip and stuff if we run too many pieces of equipment at one time because similar to a house that might have been built in 1904, the electrical wiring system just does not necessarily support our current use. But once you start doing those things, you really trigger the need, you get a project that's large enough that you start triggering the need to bring the building up to modern building codes. And there are a lot of challenges with the way that the building is designed. It is wildly out of code. Those codes govern things like fire safety, plumbing, need to egress. ADA is really, really bad. If we were literally to try to just do ADA improvements and not deal with anything else, that by itself would be over $3 million to tackle. So you're starting to get to a lot of different things. And then this building is not really well designed for the current operation. Rooms are odd, shaped strangely and laid out oddly. And so we struggle with finding enough workstations for everybody.
So I really want to give Councilmember
yes.
Reed and Burns the opportunity to say something because we're just about into the next meeting.
I will wrap up
Please
quick.
wrap up. Yeah.
That number was done by a contractor that builds things every day to bring up the building to code. It's validated by a staff estimate that was done separately before we got the contractor estimate based on our understanding of just replacing the 5 most failing building systems. And if you look at all of the studies that were done in the early 2000s, and then you escalate those forward with inflation, they also validate those numbers around $60 million.
I'm sorry, I have to say that they agreed with me that their geothermal would be very appropriate and it would be covered in large part, almost half of the cost by IRA grants. And they said, but staff didn't ask us to look into that. And here we are about, we're here about CARP, but yet they admitted. So I just want to, that needs to be stated. They did say, yeah, that's a great idea.
Point of order, we have a,
Councilmember Reed, please, your comments, and then Councilmember Burns.
yeah, and I'll try to be as quick as possible. So, one, I appreciate some of the public comment at the beginning. Someone stated, I'm not the expert. We're looking for staff to give us direction. Staff is giving us direction about the Civic Center. I asked some questions when we voted on this, and I voted no. And I'll note that 75% of the council members here also did not support a 15-year lease, and maybe 100%, but at least 75 expressed it through a vote. And I think it's important for us to really understand, the financial impact. I think there's a gentleman who wrote a series of emails, or maybe one email that felt like a series, and he pointed out that over the life, first let me ask this to Laura, over the lifetime of this lease, what will the city be paying and what will the city be paying over the lifetime of the 15-year lease?
30-some million dollars. I'm sorry, I don't have that number right off.
No worries. That's perfect answer. I think it's like 37 million is the answer.
If we didn't exercise the escape clause and if we did not sublet it.
Yes.
Correct. Again, I mean, this is a lot of office space. I have vast concerns about our ability to sublet it in the future, particularly without major renovations for the new person that's coming in. As I've said before, unless Skokie or Wilmette is looking to locate their Civic Center in Evanston, no one's going to be able to use this space the way we are. But I'll say that, yes, it's 36, 37, 38 million dollars that we'll be paying over the 15 years with the assumptions that Councilmember Newsom made. The building just sold for 28 million a few years ago. And so I will second, the calls from folks to say that this should have been something as long-term as a 15-year lease should have come to this body. I will agree with that. I will say that I don't know if the smaller purchase of Little Beans necessarily had to come to this committee. I do think that council needs to be able to move and react with efficiency. But I'll pause there because we only have a few minutes left and Councilmember Burns wants to speak. But I will say that I think the council should at our next meeting send a clear message to help staff negotiate this lease in better terms for the city, that we are not enthusiastic or quite frankly, hopefully will not accept a 15-year lease that locks us in the way that this lease does. Thank you.
Yeah. Councilmember Burns, and then we need to wrap up. Councilmember Burns?
I'll hold my comments. I don't know how useful they would be at this point. I think everything that I would say have been said. I just want to make sure that we've, Chair, if you can kind of reiterate what is being requested of us tonight.
Well, so we only have an action item for a vote, okay? I do think I don't believe it's up to us to second guess the city council. I do have a big problem with the fact that that we don't have a policy that says that unbudgeted capital projects or cost overruns over a certain amount need to come to this committee before they go to city council for approval, because that would then provide a heads up that this is coming and an opportunity for more public input and probing. So I think that absolutely needs to happen, that the city council have a policy that you pick the number. Unbudgeted capital project over 500,000, maybe, cost overrun over 500,000 needs to come here first before it goes to the city council. And we can work on what those parameters are, but I think that absolutely this should have been discussed beforehand. I don't think it's up to us to issue some sort of recommendation that we think it's a bad project. That was the city council. And this building does have major issues. I take to your point that there are major fire, it's nowhere near current fire code. I have to say, I'm fine in a group like this, but when this room is full, there is one way out of here. Well, I guess you have that, and hopefully that's actually open, right? There's a primary stairwell that way. You have two doors at the bottom of the first flight that are taped off. I can't believe this was any other building in town, you would still be able to have large public meetings in here.
Okay, so I just.
That to me is the biggest issue. What sort of safety problem do we have in this building? And it's gotten to the point where it's hard to believe that it hasn't gotten to the point where safety of continuing to have large meetings, some of which are overflow for a variety of reasons, are still being conducted in a building where there are multiple blocked exits at the bottom of the stairs. I'm sorry, but that's just.
So,
And that's the process.
That's
the
what
process.
I'm saying. We should
yes.
issue a statement so that there's a description of what we are to do. It was just undermined. And I want to say also, I mean, staff needs to try to save us money, and there's no effort clearly in this. We're just going for the largest expenses. A 15-year lease, of course, makes no sense. But not only that, we should be looking at a short-term lease. This is still sitting here. This room is fine. You were talking about a build-out of $6 million in some building downtown, most expensive property. We're not looking to find maybe property that would be less expensive. All we're looking to do is get the best property right in the heart of downtown, right next to public transportation. No one seems to be thinking, how can we save our taxpayers money? Nobody's thinking about that. So we need to, if we're going to move out, I won't even enter into the debate whether we stay here or rent while we're deciding what to do, but if we're going to move out, short term, and figure out, can we use part of this building? Maybe we continue to use this Civic Center. This wing is right by the elevators. Let's really look at what we can do to save money for our taxpayers. Okay, this isn't a bottomless pit. People are hurting financially. And this looks, again, just disrespectful of the situation that our residents are in. Thank you.
So with that, we didn't have posted that we were going to do any sort of resolution or whatever. I think it is the city council's prerogative. We need, for the next meeting, I believe, to discuss a policy relative to how big of a capital project overrun or unbudgeted capital project has to come here first. I think that's all we can do right now. I'm not comfortable in saying we disagree with this capital project. The city council, in its judgment, passed a resolution to proceed. And we're here, I think, primarily to improve process. And I think, was it a good process that it wasn't discussed? No. It needs to be discussed in the future, but it is,
A statement regarding process, I think we should issue, because it could happen again, and this isn't right for our residents.
Just a quick point, so we don't have to drag on. Make a motion. You don't have to
Okay,
wait
so
for the
I
chair
would
to
like,
agree.
so I
You can
think
make a
there's
motion.
two motions. One is that we establish a policy whereby when there's an expenditure that exceeds the approved budget by a certain amount, that must first come to finance and budget to be determined, right?
Second.
Okay, so that's been moved and seconded. Can we take a vote?
Who's going to determine the amount?
We'll work that out.
I
but
think
this
we
is-
will at committee.
Right, at committee.
I don't like voting on something that's not written out beforehand, that we
Okay,
know what we're
I'll
actually
send
voting
it to you
on.
what I just.
I would say
I
we'll
think
talk
we're
about it at the
bringing
next
it
meeting.
for discussion and for
Right.
action.
And so we know what we are voting on.
Okay,
So,
I'll send that to you right now.
I
but
guess
it's pretty-
just to clarify, I think what I'm going to be voting on is to place this item on the agenda for our next meeting. And whether we vote on it at that meeting or at a subsequent meeting, we'll have the discussion, determine an amount, and be ready to move forward.
let's define what that is going to be between now and the next meeting.
Well, let's just vote right now to make sure that's on the next agenda item.
Okay,
on
well,
our
we
next-
will have it on the next agenda item to vote on a requirement for unplanned capital expenditures or cost overruns to first come here before they go to the city council. That we will have on the next.
I would also like to
agenda.
see a statement of, not of disapproving of the project, I mean, although I do, but that process. We need to ensure that this doesn't happen again, and I think by issuing a statement of, what would it be, discontent regarding the process, I think that gives more assurance that that won't happen again. So I would like to see us consider that.
I think that's something we could do in the next meeting. I mean, the city council can take back up whether they want to unapprove what they approved.
I think I'm
And I
not
think
making
it's
myself
inappropriate
clear.
for us
I just,
here to
I'm not
jump
talking
into
about that.
that.
I'm saying simply a statement of disapproval of the way the process played out.
I think
That's all.
that'll be implied at the next meeting when we come up with this process, and we can say, for future, I think it'll be implied when we come up with that at the next
Like
meeting.
it, I want to be explicit. Thank you.
So with that, we are over time. I agree with this should have been discussed earlier. It wasn't. We need a policy. So with that, we are adjourned.